Well, I guess for now I will go ahead and get started. Just a quick side note for it, I do have some like video to show with it. So what I'm gonna do is try to go through like segments, show some video, stop for questions, go through a segment, show video, stop for questions, show video, segments, etc. So if you guys have any questions, just kind of save them. I will give you plenty of chances to like reply to them. And if you're watching like the stream or anything, go ahead and put it in like Mad Chatters, and I'll be able to see because I have that up. But go ahead and get started for P1. This stuff is a lot of stuff we've seen, but I just want to reiterate some of the positioning and show some like pretty good video footage that like shows like really good teams how coordinated they are for it. I think that'll help a fair amount. So off the start, range and healers that are classified as range start at the lock gate. Everyone else starts at this lock gate. We bloodlust. We wait for the first actual damage tick of the bombs, or when your weak aura gets to blank, you take the gate over. When we're here, we have the first breath. Ideally, we want to point it towards like the lock gate that we were at before, where ranged and melee met. And then the melee if you get it, you move away. I do have a specific video of now playing Rhett that shows a really like kind of troublesome bait and things that you don't want to do. So we'll get to that in a minute. But ideally, if we have it close enough to the range stack, the healers are able to take it and then move back. And then the number one rule of all the breaths, which I've mentioned plenty of times, but I guess people still haven't really caught on to, is that when you get the first tick of breath, it'll, put a debuff out on anyone. If that debuff will slowly start to tick down as damage to the raid. So if anyone refreshes and, ticks on, like, cleanse their buff on a different tick of the flame breath, it will refresh everyone's buff. So then they just take free ticks of damage, and it's just too much damage for healers. So we have to be very careful about taking one tick. And for us, we're going to do our tanks and our healers on the very first tick to make sure that we're cleansing 6. That way later damage taken will be significantly lessened. We get ranged to their position, and they move across over to star. As we get over to star, we want to run back in, and then we want to be on the very edge. We'll be very tight for range and melee to soak. Healers and tanks don't soak. We go over to the side after the first tick. Then once that repeats, you have about 6 seconds for the ranged and healers. Get back to star. The third breath is the last breath that you have to potentially get cleansed, so just try to bait it away from the range stack. And then in the fourth one, where we're getting to the fourth position after we bait the third set of bombs over to X, we have the disintegrates. Just make sure that you are far enough away. You cannot get cleared behind, so you have to make sure that everyone is between you and the little eternity thing that he spawns. And even melee have to get cleansed. If you're not getting cleansed, personal responsibility to make sure that you don't get hit by it. We'll have a roar, and after some healing, while we sit there during the glittering surge, we're going to run back over to diamond and stack really, really tight for the P1 transition. This should be fairly self-explanatory, and this is the kind of stuff that we've done before. But I do have some video just to kind of go over like the positioning of it. This is the Liquid World First Kill. This is their Holy Priest POV that they have. When they get the first knockback, first thing I want to point out that we were struggling with is like we have their green mark over here where the kind of health pot or healthstone area is. These people are moving really, really slow to make sure they're maximizing their damage. There's no rush. And they're all stacked up really tight with their melee to bait the breath perfectly right towards where the range want to be. So you stand on the edge of it if you're a healer, you take the first tick, and then you're already in the position that we want to be in optimally. So we need to make sure for melee specifically, we are very, very tight and we are very calculated with our baiting. Once we bait the first set of bombs, we all go back, and I want to show this extra little part because once the next breath is baited correctly, if you're a healer, you obviously don't want to get into it, so there's like little spaces off to the side, so you don't have to move as far, so then you can start ramping into your actual healing. Makes it really easily. Same if you are like a range player and you accidentally got cleansed, this is ideally what you'd want to do, is just move off to the side. For the melee perspective, on something not to do, something that we kind of went over, is like when glittering surge happens, there's a knockback, and then after it, disintegrate comes before breath. And Disintegrate doesn't expire until Breath is cast, or like even before it. So now here is going to be targeted by a Disintegrate, and he is going to get off of his team's stack, which is bad because he doesn't wait for the Breath. The Breath then picks him, so now his tanks and healers have to move farther. So in this case scenario, you stay with the melee stack. You have 3 seconds after the Breath is actually cast to then move away from the group to make sure you're not clipping in with Disintegrate. The positive side for him, though, is that he stays really close to the ad that spawns, because then the beam doesn't have as much travel time. If there's someone randomly near him, he's much closer to the ad. There's no opportunity for someone else to get picked. And just same as before, their range stack is really tight. They bait it out, and then they intentionally run in to make sure that they bait, and everyone is super tight here on this little stack. The breath comes out, and then they just sidestep it. They take 1 tick, and then they move back into their position afterwards for the range team. So that's, I think, the part that we were struggling the most on, because, transition number 3 and transition number 4 and the disintegration seemed pretty easy. But getting to here, just making sure we're all alive, making sure we're doing the mechanics correctly, and like the decision-making that you might personally have to do is something I think we struggled on. But I wanted to keep this part kind of short. But that's at least the P1 into the transition. Does anyone have any questions, generally speaking, about P1 specifically? Because I know that we're mostly through it, but I just wanted to review just so people, have it down.
Do we have any weak auras that will show the debuffs better? I know that there's a lot of confusion with the liquid one, that the one table was not necessarily trustable.
For like the surges and stuff, is like
Mhm.
obviously like in this kill, like you can't see anywhere where all of the like the names of people are. But I found out that if you immunity it, it'll say that you're not cleansed by that one. But when then you get to the disintegrate, it works. Honestly, it just you have to look at your own buffs. So like here on this, like you can see everyone here has 2 stacks of this. When the first fire breath tick comes out, you'll see that a lot of people now have this like red debuff, or more specifically, when they get cleansed, they'll have like a red circle debuff, or they should have a red circle debuff. It's like this up here, like this red supernova thing. Like some raid frames show that. Like that's the indicator that someone's been hit. So if you have this debuff on your raid frame, then you're fine. Or if you have a stack, then like it means you need to get hit by something. And then obviously, if you have 2 stacks, that means you haven't get hit by anything. I can try to see if there's a better weak aura to distribute those buffs, but to my knowledge, it really just whatever you personally have.
Okay.
But yeah, I'll
Yeah,
look
I
into
just
more.
yeah, just if I had something like a little bit front and center versus like looking up at my buffs in the top right, like sometimes that gets a little bit messy.
Yeah, of course. Does anyone else have any general questions about as far as this goes? Just the P1 in general?
So the healer and tank clear that liquid does, um, they it looks like they pointed the first breath towards the outside of the room. We've been pointing it like directly behind the boss. Are we gonna continue directly behind the boss or do it more like?
So ideally, like where our locket is, because if you'll see on the liquid POV again, like their mass disintegrates come out, and then they're going to move the boss a couple steps forward, and then they're going to point it like kind of towards where the range started. This would be ideal for where we want to be, and it's kind of the same way. I don't do a perfect representation here in this, but like ideally we want to point it close to where the range started. That way the healers have less total space to move, and it's just much easier for them. And then melee, they can just sidestep and then they'll just chase the boss afterwards, and it's pretty easy for them. But this makes it very good for the healers specifically. Just the one thing we have to be very careful, don't point it directly at where the range should go now. It has to be where they were previous, and this is what we're going to try to really hammer home. So again, this picture doesn't do a perfect representation, but the liquid one is much more clear. They're pointing straight to where the pools are. The healers stand on the very edge of it. They take their 1 tick, and then they move off. And that's what we optimally want to be doing as well.
Okay, so I mean that's just okay. Yeah, we'll have to. That's not what we were doing Thursday. So
Yeah, that's what we want to
make
move.
that
That's
clear
what we
to
want to move
everyone.
towards. If there are no other questions, we'll move on to kind of P2. And I want to talk about the transition. I think it's pretty straightforward, but we just, we stack. You have 4 seconds to get your debuffs and then get to Moon, and then afterwards you just get as many as you want, and then Frilly's going to call her phase up. When Frilly calls phase up, ranged are going to be very tight together here on the left, and the melee are going to be very tight together on the right. The important thing is that there's, 3 main mechanics that come out. The bombs will always target a ranged or healer, and the breath will always target a ranged or a healer. So if we're always together, we can bait all of the bombs and all of the breaths exactly where we want them to go, and it'll be important for later in the fight. And the melee always get the blossoms. So the blossoms that like clear the ad debuff, the melee have to be tight, because if the melee are running around, it's a problem. So this is where it kind of goes into where we were not doing this last week because we just wanted to try to get through P1 and just get some amount of reps. But this is ideally what we are going to be doing positioning wise when we get in there on Wednesday. We're going to have all of the people come out on like the left side of all of the purple like debuffs. So you should be coming out here, and we stack together to bait the first breath. And then you guys just sidestep it. Range and healer stack tight, bait the breath, and then also bait the bombs. And then the melee are just staying there waiting for the ads to spawn. When the ads spawn, it'll always target either tanks or melee. It can target tanks, so you guys just kind of stay in a clump. And then once they spawn, you guys just backpedal enough to keep the ads through it to make sure they all get cleansed. If we miss one, we have knockback potential. We have, shaman knockback. We have, worst case scenario, we can use our ROP. We can, grip them back in with pause. We have plenty of options. We just need to make sure that they get cleansed. But then the goal is for the melee and the tanks to stay right on the edge of the blossom. The ranged, once you guys sidestep the breath, you guys don't have to move. You guys can just stand there, and you guys can hang out for a while. But it's very important that the melee, it's a very small amount of movement. You guys bait together, you move just to the side of it, and then you stay there for the time being. Make sure that you're not walking into it. The other part that's going to come out is the bombs. How we're going to bait them correctly is if we're all stacked, we'll like do one side step to drop the first bomb, we do the second bomb drops, and we do another side step, and then the range are then planted again. Melee have never moved after the ads came through, and then we have people that are designated for the bombs. The first one is going beam, the second one is rampant. One important thing, and this will also apply for 19 specifically in P or like the later part of P2. When the first bomb is baited, there is a small chance that if you don't walk with your team, that it baits on you and it drops 2 bombs on the same spot, and that just makes it harder. So the first person, bomb 1, when we bait the first bomb, they sidestep with the team until the second bomb swirly appears. Then bomb 1 walks back, picks up their bomb 2 walks, picks up their bomb, and then they can go and head down. The first one, you want to head down pretty quickly, just to make sure you can get max stacks and have good positioning. But the second one, it'll be a little bit delayed, and I'll go into that in just a moment. This is also showing the bombs, just in case anyone has to call like an audible or needs someone to soak. When you go downstairs, you spawn one of the purple circles from P1, and again, if you touch those, you just die. And then when the bomb explodes and expires, it also drops 1. So in an ideal situation, you want to take your one as far away from the middle as possible. Then you want to drop it either at an edge or near a previous set. And again, in this entire time, the range stack and the melee stack haven't really moved. And then this is the last slide I'll show before we stop for questions or watch some video stuff. This is Infinite Duress. We have our range that are still stacked and our melee that are still stacked together. Ideally, whoever gets chosen, in this example it's a melee. Melee gets Infinite Duress. They go to the edge just behind the range stack. We call a 3, 2, 1 countdown to make sure people are in the correct position to not get knocked off the edge or like move. And then we do the cleanse. The orange line is where people are getting knocked back to, so the range are going to get knocked back to here, melee gets to here, and then you guys run back and reset your positions. One thing that can help a lot with this, specifically if we have priests, if we can get grips, just say like, hey, on Infinite Duress 1, Coleslaw always grips the person that gets it. That way that person always snaps immediately to the range pile. They take 1 or 2 steps, and we can immediately start that 1, 2, 3 countdown, or 3, 2, 1. And that will make that phase much quicker, because Infinite Duress 2 has to be very quick. But this is just the first part, and then we're going to repeat this kind of segment 3 more times total. But I do want to show some quick video snippets of like the start of P2 to go through one of these cycles. First off, for healer perspective, the important thing here is that like you don't always need the stacks. Like they have a very specific time they come up. Their healer priest right here only gets 7, so it's more important that you do the mechanics and you get up. Their ranged are relatively stacked and they sidestep. And then you'll see like right as Sarkareth goes back, the ranged then get pretty tightly stacked as the melee get tightly stacked. They fuck up the stack here, but then they're able to use a knockback to make sure that they knock back and cleanse the mobs, and that's like worst case scenario. Here's the bomb bait. They're all stacked up tight. Barmu is the first person that takes it. Ideally, he wants to move with the group. You bait the second bomb, and that person goes back. You just stand directly in the swirly. It does not deal much damage. You just take up the first bomb. This person here, Nick, takes the second bomb the second it spawns. That way it avoids ticking on the raid, and they immediately go in for this phase. So this is kind of what we're looking at for at least this first part here. I'm going to go a little bit farther just to show Infinite Duress. They don't do a grip strategy, but again, the preferred strategy would have Priest grip this person in. They do a 3, 2, 1 dispel countdown. All those people get knocked back to the middle, and then you can see immediately the range stack moves directly back to their stack point together for the next bait, and the melee are also stacked up together for their bait. To show from a melee perspective, for this one, and I went a little too far, so I got to go back to 219, 220. When you come back up, ideally, perfect case scenario, right before you're going to go up, you take 1 spark and you run in. He has 1 in his, so he takes it, refreshes his buff. He has the full 20% haste buff. He's stacked up tight with his melee. His range are stacked up. This is one where sometimes the breath just won't go the right way. If this breath doesn't go the right way, it's fine, but that just means that the range don't have to sidestep or move. It's fine. We go back. The melee are super tight together. They get the blossoms, and they just barely back up. You can see they're even backpedaling to get out of it, and then the melee are, just standing right at the tip. You want to be right on the tip of that circle, and that it'll be more important for later. And the boss moving this far is actually a bad thing, and I'll point out why in a minute. To rewind just a second, just to point out what the ranged are doing. As the ranged are super tight together, they bait the first bomb that's about to come out. They move as a unit, they stop, they move as a unit, they stop. Both the people are just waiting for the bombs to spawn. They take them, and they're going to go straight down, away from the middle as they go down. Infinite Duress comes out. Ideal situation, we would have a priest grip this person over to the edge. They do a 3, 2, 1 countdown, and then they immediately go back to their stack locations. Now, one thing to point out is that the boss has moved a little too far here, and it's more of an optimization thing that I'll get in after I do some, questions and we stop for a minute. So this is like the first part of P2. The remaining part has a different timing of when spells queue up and when they come out, but that's the general idea. We're always going to do a bait the bombs or bait a breath, then we're going to have the blossoms that are going to come out, and then we're going to have an infinite duress that goes right behind the range group. So for the moment, just on what I've shown, does anyone have any questions about kind of the starting of P2?
I have one.
Sure.
So when you transition, and I know that was really early on, is there any rhyme or reason to those 3 white circles that take us back upstairs? Because I noticed the only time I got to that phase, it was in the void circles, and I was like, well, good thing I died.
So here's I'll rewind a little bit more to kind of show it better from the liquid POV. So when they're really stacked super tight like this, they're all like very, very pixel stacked, and ideally if we're standing on the correct spot, they will jump to the same place for everyone. You'll see like this one lands here. This one is always either going to like hit the quote unquote edge and then bounce backwards, or this one will always go off the side. So this one that's in the middle will either be like on the edge if we were a little too far in, but if you're farther out, it'll always jump over towards moon. So like in this example, the one that was bad jumped over behind the stack, but he has enough room because we weren't all the way at the edge. He takes one stack, he goes back, and he takes this, and then he actually does the bad one first because he just wants to get it out of the way, and then takes this one last, and he doesn't have enough time, so he doesn't get enough stacks. This would be ideal situation for pretty much everyone. If we're in a perfect position, there will never ever be one at the edge. If we're a little bit off, one will bounce to the edge, and there should be enough of a gap. But in the other case scenario, like it'll bounce on moon, and then you'll have one kind of at like this guy's bar where intermission is. You'll have one on moon, and then you'll have one to the like left of purple right now. That would be the ideal pattern. But obviously, if like even liquid isn't perfectly stacked, if we're not perfectly stacked, you just have to identify that one of them's in a bad spot, and you have to do it early on to specifically like sacrifice stacks. Because if you do it too late or like people fuck up the moon one, then we're just kind of screwed. And it'll be like a Frilly situation where she got landlocked. Does that make sense to answer the question?
Thanks.
Yeah, of course.
Yep.
Anyone else questions about P1, like the start of P2?
Just a statement that I can't believe you fucked up Baboomabam's name that bad.
Oh, I messaged Frage. That's too funny.
Two? What? I'm confused.
Barmoo.
It's
It's
Baboomabam.
No,
Baboomabam.
Yeah, say his name right.
Ba-boom-ba-bam. God
Put some
damn.
respect on his fucking name, man.
Yo, man, he's not
Ridiculous.
one of our raiders, okay? Okay.
I
Anywho,
don't even know which person in Liquid that is. It's just like a fucking good name.
that's fair. Okay, so when Infinite Duress 1 ends, we get knocked back towards the middle, and this is like the second half of P2, and I'm going to go through the rest of P2 from here on out, and we'll stop and we'll like kind of review things, because again, the spell queuing is different for the second half. Once Infinite Duress 1 ends, important thing here, 19 is going to set up a gate that we are going to use later. You're going to do it like as far towards where we would initially like spawn in as possible, and we're going to have a bait of a breath. And from when Infinite Duress 1 ends and Breath 2 begins, it's about 7 seconds. So that means Infinite Duress, we cleanse it. You probably have like 3 seconds to run back to this spot ranged, place the lock gate for 19, and then we move out of the breath. So once we move out of the breath and we have the lock gate correctly, we're going to do the same thing. It's breath, the melee get the blossoms when the ads spawn, and then the ranged are going to be baiting bombs pretty soon. But again, spell queuing different. So the melee, you guys are baiting your blossoms. You guys side back just a little bit. You stand on just the edge of your blossoms that you spawn. You start hitting the ads. Again, to reiterate, like you're hitting the big ad. It's hectic ad cleave. Make sure that we get our interrupts. And if we need to do an AoE stun or an AoE something to make the other one stop casting, we use AoE tools. Instead of doing bombs, a Infinite Duress comes 2. Or Infinite Duress 2 comes next. And then the bombs come literally right afterwards. This is why we have the lock gate set up. I know this is a lot of arrows, but I'm going to go through it in correct order. We're starting with the melee person here that gets picked by Infinite Duress as we're killing the ad. They're going to run past the range stack over to the wall. They get cleansed, and the orange lines are where people get knocked back to. So the melee and the tanks get knocked back to here, and they just have to run back in. The range, DPS, and healers get knocked back, and when they do, they take the lock gate. There is a grace period of about 2 seconds from when the knockback occurs, taking the lock gate and stacking back up for bombs number 2. Then we do bombs 2 as we're stacked up. We bait the first bomb, we move. We bait the second bomb, we move. The very first bomb is going to be 19, and the second bomb is actually going to be pause. And the reason that we're having a melee do the second one is because his cooldowns are going to be done. He's basically going to be doing no damage, so it won't really matter. His positioning will just be to get haste for the upcoming phase. So we have these two people get their stacks, do the same thing with the bomb, and after picking it up, right after this bomb, breath 3 occurs. So while 19 and pause are doing their thing with the bombs, all of us are baiting the breath. We're doing the blossoms that come directly after it. And then at the end of the phase, once we have it, there is a third infinite duress right before we transition. So right here is the very end of P3. All of the ads should die, our goals. All the ads are dead. We are preparing to go down as we clear this infinite duress. So we get knocked back, and then we run back in together. And the boss should be at around 45% HP or less. That is our target goal. To walk through that really quick, just one time through. Infinite duress one ends. We do a breath into blossom. Then we do a duress. The ranged and healers take the lock gate through this duress, and then they bait bombs. Right after these bombs end, then we bait breath 3. Breath 3 finishes, we have the blossoms, and then right before transition, we have infinite duress that comes out, and then we kill the ads. So it's a very different cadence of when the abilities come out, but it's the same kind of general idea. And then to go over the videos of these that I think are pretty useful to actually use. This one is Liquid Ones. This is right at the end of breath number 2. So they just finished their infinite duress. They stack up tight, they bait the breath, they sidestep, then they go into a blossom. The melee make sure that they are nice and tightly stacked, make sure that the ads are dragged through it, and they stand right at the edge of the actual thing. Their warlock puts down the lock gate. There comes infinite duress. Infinite duress goes right behind the range stack, and they get the knockback. When the knockback occurs, the ranged and healers take the gate back to their stack position as they bait the bombs. Bombs are baited, 1 and 2. We would have 19 take the first, pause take the second, and the breath happens. Here, an interesting thing happens where this person was ranged, and the breath actually targeted that ranged player. So, this range stack wouldn't have to move too much farther, which is great. But it's just something small to consider. That it can even pick you if you're picking up the bomb, so you have to be aware of your positioning and your movement. As they move over to the side, the ads come down. They do Blossom 3. And as Blossom 3 occurs, their range kind of have to push through because their melee weren't in a perfect position. Blossom 3 occurs, they kind of push through it. They kill the ads, and then right before they transition, they have Infinite Duress 3 that gets cast in just a second. They have their Demon Hunter just run off to the edge after they are almost done killing the ad, and then right as the ad dies, they clear, and then they set up to go down together, and specifically the timing that we're going to use on the stage timer, the boss will be immune at this point. When the stage timer counts down and hits 5 seconds, we walk in together, so we should transition downstairs at around 4 seconds, 3 seconds, somewhere in that range. Also fair to note, just as I mentioned with the bombs much earlier, when we all go down together, we spawn a shit ton of bad. So if you're standing there and you are like, oh, I'm going to wait a second, okay, I phased, and you don't move right away, you have a 1.5 second grace period to move out of these puddles, or you instantly get teleported into the arena and die, even in this phase. As kind of Sato brought up, sometimes pools will spawn bad, and if we're not stacked tightly, we will have, a little bit of overlap. I would highly suggest doing this one first, unless it's in a weird spot. The nice thing here, there is no other ability coming out, so you're not going to drop a second pool, so you can just grab stacks, and you can get back to your stack point. Make sure that, everything's going well. Once you get your last thing, we come up, and this one is going to be something I'm going to get to at the very end, where Frazier is going to be calling for us to come up. We all come up, we start P3. Not really worried about P3 at the moment, because we have to get through it. And then this is the video for the melee perspective through the second half of P2. They just are doing their Infinite Duress 1 here, and just as before, they're stacking up really tight. Something I'm not a huge fan of here, the melee are in the breath path, so they're going to have to walk over to the side. So here, melee, there is no reason to be standing in the way of the breath path, because we already know it's going to target a range, because it is a required mechanic to target a range. So you guys would be standing over to the right instead of here, so you don't have to do that extra little movement. But just as before I mentioned, we do our breath 2 bait, and then we start hitting the ads. The boss movement here is immaculate, and this is why I'm specifically showing this one. They get right to the edge, and they keep the boss inside. As this happens, they put down the lock gate. Infinite Duress 2 comes out. They're going to have the person move over, and they're going to get them cleansed. They were already in a perfect spot, but they do a 3-2-1. Their Evoker moves. They do the lock gate, back to their spot, they bait the bombs, and then they bait the breath. Now this is really important, something that I want us to try to do specifically for this one. If Fraz and Frilly, if the two of you are able to keep the boss inside of the previous Blossom when he does one of the breaths, when the ads spawn, they will spawn inside Blossom 2, and they'll already be cleansed, and we can do max damage. This is a really big optimization that'll just make it so we just gain a shit ton of damage on the boss for almost no reason. We can do it with after the first one going into the second ads, and we can do it the second going into the third. We obviously can't do it on the very first set of ads, but this is a really good optimization that we want to make sure we have down. If those ads spawn in there, we just gain a shit ton of damage because they don't heal at all. But we just did breath number 3. They're doing the blossoms because they have to do blossom 3. And then as they're finishing off these ads, we go into the transition. Infinite duress occurs. They have their infinite duress go off the side. They do a 3, 2, 1. They clear the infinite duress. They hit and finish the ad. And then they're standing, getting ready to go into the downstairs. And they go down at 5 seconds on this boss immunity timer. 6, 5, and then they go in together. And they all try to stay relatively close. And when they get through, they just get their stacks. They're waiting for their tank to call them to come up. And they're just trying to maximize their efficiency, not touch puddles, etc. So that's kind of the ending of P2. And then there's just one little slide for Fraz specifically, just as a refresher for you. Once we're all downstairs, we're doing our own thing. You're here. You're going to pull the boss to the middle. Once you get infinite duress, you're going to bubble, cleanse it off, spell warding it off, however you are able to do it. Or I believe you can pre-spell warding yourself, something along those lines. When the big black circle comes out, you horse and you run straight to Skull. And then you give us an audible call in the same way that Frilly gave us an audible call in P1 transition. You're doing it here for us. The second you see those swirlies appear under your feet at Skull, you tell everyone to come up. And then everyone will come up and we start P3. And again, I don't have P3 slides right now because I need a whole separate raid plan and it'll take me probably 3 or 4 hours to set it up. And I'm not really worried about P3 yet. But so far, that's all of P2. Does anyone have any general questions about the second half of P2, including the timings, where we're going to be movement-wise, anything of the sort? Because I know that that was probably a whole lot. Okay, well, if we're all relatively good with this, if you guys want to, I can start talking about a little bit of P3 and show them kind of from the POVs. I think it might be a little too much to digest right now, as I want us to do P1 and P2, but if you guys want it, we can spend the extra time before the strays go to raid.
Say don't worry about getting into P3 too much right now, like just have another sit down.
Yeah, I mean,
when we're about to get into it, right? Like,
yeah, that's
with
fine.
P3, we probably will actually have to take a raid, actual raid time to sit down and go over it because everything's so precise with when people need to get stacks and shit. And it's really
yeah, it's pretty rough. There's one specific one hard thing that we could show just of what we're going to expect. But there's a point where we're at where my mouse cursor is here, and there's an infinite duress, and one of the black holes go off. And the idea is we wait for Sarkareth to do this big black hole thingy. We cleanse the person with infinite duress, so we all get knocked back to green together, and then we soak one of the black holes as we also drop the meteors. So there will be very precise timing, but I don't think we need to worry about it right now. But I'm gonna stop the recording for